Stephen's hands were shaking as he gripped the hospital room's plastic chair. 3 months of prayers, 3 months of believing that faith was enough. And now his mother lay in the bed beside him, gone. The machines had been turned off an hour ago, and Stephen sat there in the dark, his phone still open to the last text he'd sent his prayer group, believing God for a miracle tonight. There was no miracle. Stephen had always been the guy with the answers, the one who quoted scripture at parties, the one who led Bible studies, the one who seemed to have cracked the code on faith. He'd grown up hearing it from every pulpit, every book, every Christian he trusted. Prayer changes things. Faith moves mountains. Ask and you shall receive. These weren't just sayings, they were promises. And he'd cash them in like checks, expecting them to clear. When his mother got sick, Stephen went into overdrive. He didn't just pray, he weaponized his faith. He fasted. He anointed her forehead with oil and spoke declarations. He organized prayer chains with hundreds of people. Pastors from 3 churches came and laid hands on her. Surely God would listen to that kind of volume, that kind of desperation, that kind of faith. But God didn't listen. Or if he did, he said no. The thing that made it worse was that Stephen didn't feel angry at first. He felt guilty. Because somewhere deep down he wondered if it was his fault. His. Maybe his faith wasn't strong enough. Maybe there was sin he hadn't confessed. Maybe God was punishing him. These thoughts circled his mind like vultures. They felt true, and explanations, even painful ones, felt better than the alternative, that God simply didn't answer. So Stephen threw himself into finding the answer. He read every book about suffering and faith he could find. He watched sermons about Job, about trials, about the problem of pain. He was searching for the magic words that would make this make sense, because if he could just understand why God said no, maybe he could accept it. It was 2 months after his mother's death when Stephen sat in a coffee shop across from Maria. She'd lost a child years ago. And unlike everyone else, she wasn't offering platitudes or quoting Psalm 23. She just sat with him and asked, "Has anyone told you that it's okay to not be okay?" Stephen spent the next hour telling Maria everything, every unanswered prayer, every moment of doubt, every time he felt God had abandoned him. And Maria listened without trying to fix it. Then she opened her Bible to a place of raw pain. She read Romans 9:19-21 to him. "But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Has the potter no right over the clay, to make from the same lump one vessel for honored use and another for dishonorable use?" Stephen flinched. "So God can just do whatever he wants?" "I'm telling you something harder," Maria said quietly. "God doesn't owe you explanations. Not because he's cruel, because he's God. And the moment you're demanding he justify himself to you, you're putting yourself in his position. That's the real lie you've been believing." It hit Stephen hard. For months, he'd operated under the assumption that God owed him clarity, that if he prayed hard enough, believed hard enough, lived right enough, then God would explain himself. And when that didn't happen, he assumed something was broken, either in him or in God. But what if that framework was wrong? What if the promise wasn't pray and get what you want? Maria turned to 2 Corinthians 12:8-9. "3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" She looked at Stephen. "Paul prayed 3 times for God to remove his thorn, and God said no. Full stop." And Paul's response wasn't to question God's power or love. It was to say, "If this is how God operates, then I'll glory in my weakness." "You prayed for God to heal your mother," Maria continued. "That prayer didn't go unanswered. God answered it, he said no. And you're allowed to grieve that, you're allowed to be angry. But what you're not allowed to do, what I had to stop doing, is act like God was unfaithful. He was exactly who he said he was. He was present. He was sovereign. He was good. None of that changed because you didn't get the outcome you wanted." And there it was. The moment everything Stephen thought he knew about prayer ran headfirst into a God who didn't operate that way, who couldn't be negotiated with. who answered prayers with silence sometimes, and that didn't make him less good. Stephen left that coffee shop different, not fixed, not suddenly healed from his grief, but something shifted. Because what he started to understand was that his mother's death hadn't destroyed his faith. It had destroyed an illusion. He'd been worshiping a version of God who was basically a cosmic vending machine. You put in your prayers, and out popped your answered requests. And that God had never existed. He'd always been a fantasy. In the weeks after, Stephen's prayer life changed. He still prayed, but differently. He prayed without expectations of outcomes. He prayed understanding that God might say yes, no, or wait, and that all three are equally faithful responses. He prayed knowing that sometimes the silence from heaven is not God's absence. It's his presence protecting him from a smaller version of himself. One Sunday he was back at church and the pastor preached on Habakkuk, the prophet who literally wrote scripture saying, "God, I don't understand what you're doing." And Habakkuk's famous declaration, "Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation." That's when Stephen cried. Not tears of confusion anymore, tears of surrender. Because he finally got it. That faith wasn't about guaranteed outcomes. It was about loving God even when the outcome breaks you. His mother was still gone. He still missed her. He still had moments where he wondered why God didn't step in. But he wasn't wondering if God was good anymore. In the silence of that hospital room, in the emptiness after the funeral, in the dark nights when prayer felt like shouting into a void, he encountered a God who didn't need to justify himself, who loved him not because Stephen understood the plan, but despite the fact that he didn't. Stephen learned that unanswered prayer isn't a failure of faith. It's an opportunity to discover what faith actually is. It's the choice to follow a God you don't fully understand, to trust a heart you can't see, to believe that goodness exists even in the spaces where you expected answers and found only silence instead. That's the gospel nobody wants to hear, but everybody needs to learn. Because every single person watching this will pray a prayer that God doesn't answer the way they want. And in that moment, you'll have a choice. You can decide that God failed you. Or you can decide to become the kind of person who loves God even when he doesn't explain himself. And friend, that second choice, that's when your faith actually becomes real. If this message resonated with you, if you've experienced that silence and you're learning to trust anyway, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Let's create a community where we can be honest about our doubts and the unexpected ways God shows up. And if this helped you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Like this video, subscribe to Faith Infused, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into what it really means to follow Christ in a world that does not always make sense. We'll see you next time.